When my father told me the story, he spoke like he was remembering something he shouldn't. His voice dropped low, like the room had ears. We were alone in our old farmhouse, winter pressing against the windows like a breath held too long. The fire cracked, and outside the snow came down slow and silent, like ash. He said, "Widow's Hollow isn't marked on any map worth trusting. It's a place that appears when you're mourning, and disappears when you're done. Which is to say, it never really goes away." I thought he was telling me a parable. I had just lost my mother, and in those days my grief made everything shimmer, like heat on the road. But he wasn't trying to comfort me. He was warning me. He told me there's a bell there, tall and rusted, its yoke swallowed by thorns and time. No one remembers when it was built. No plaque, no dates. Just the shape of sorrow, cast in iron. Locals say it tolls only when the living call for the dead, and that sometimes, the dead answer. I didn't believe him. I was 14, angry at the world, angry at death. But his eyes didn't blink when he said, "Some doors you don't knock on unless you're prepared for who, or what, might open them." Years passed. I grew up, moved out, tried to forget. But grief, it seems, doesn't forget you. It came back for me last autumn. My daughter, Ellie, drowned while visiting her cousins up north. 9 years old. A slip on the riverbank. 1 second laughing, the next, just ripples. No one saw her fall. No one heard a scream. They searched the waters for 3 days. No body. Just her little red scarf caught in the reeds. Grief is a quiet violence. You don't see the wound, but you bleed all the same. After the funeral, I say that out of habit, there was no body to bury, I found myself driving. No destination. Just miles. Endless back roads. I barely remember how long I was on the road when I first saw the fog. It rolled over the trees like breath, thick and low, even though the sun was shining above me. I don't remember turning off the highway. I only remember the sign. Widow's Hollow, 3 miles. I slammed the brakes. Heart hammering. The name struck something in me, ancient and cold. But I didn't turn back. Because something deep in my grief-stained bones whispered. The bell still stands. And I had a daughter who was no longer breathing. The road narrowed as I drove, curling like a spine through the trees. The fog thickened with every turn, the sun vanishing behind a gauze of gray. My headlights caught glimpses of things that might have been branches, or limbs. I told myself it was just the forest playing tricks. But something about that road felt alive, like it was guiding me, or worse, expecting me. When I reached the village, it was like stepping into a photograph left out in the rain. The houses leaned, weary and water-stained. Their shutters hung crooked, windows like cataract eyes. Ivy crawled up every surface, as if the green had grown tired of waiting for people and decided to claim the place for itself. I saw no movement. No cars. No sound but the hum of my engine. And yet, it felt watched. Not by people. By the town itself. There was no main street, not really. Just a wide gravel path flanked by buildings that looked like they'd surrendered to time. A chapel stood at the far end, hunched and solemn. I could just make out the rusted silhouette of the bell tower behind it, jutting like a crooked finger into the mist. I parked, killed the engine, and sat for a moment in the silence. My hands trembled on the wheel. A part of me, maybe the last rational scrap, told me to leave. But when you lose a child, reason is just another voice you learn to ignore. I stepped out. The air was heavy. The kind that presses into your lungs, damp and still. My footsteps crunched on gravel, and it felt almost wrong to break the silence. Like I was disturbing something ancient and sleeping. Then I saw her. An old woman stood in the chapel doorway, still as a statue, her hands clasped in front of her. Her face was lined like cracked parchment, eyes like burnt coals. She wore black from collar to boot, and a silver crucifix hung heavy from her neck. "You've come," she said, as though we had spoken before. I opened my mouth, but no sound came. She didn't wait. "The bell's not for tourists," she murmured, voice like dry leaves. "It answers grief. And grief alone." I found my voice. I lost my daughter. Her eyes softened. just a flicker. Then the bell may hear you. But it does not give back what it takes. She turned, slow and deliberate, and beckoned me into the chapel. And like a fool, or a father, I followed. Inside, the air was colder. Dust motes danced in shafts of grey light. The pews were cracked and warped, as though the sorrow of those who sat in them had bent the wood. At the far end, behind the pulpit, was a door. She led me to it. Behind that door, I knew, was the path to the bell. She placed a key in my hand, cold, iron, old. "Midnight," she said. "One toll. No more. No less. And when it rings, do not speak to what comes. Not unless you want it to stay." I asked her, "What comes?" She just stared at me, then whispered. "Not everything that answers to love was ever alive." Then she left me there, alone with the key, the silence, and the door that waited to be opened. The key was old, its metal pitted and cold, like it had spent centuries buried in earth too stubborn to forget. I turned it over in my palm as the chapel settled behind me, wood groaning with the slow ache of old bones. I stood before the door she had led me to, nestled into the stone like it had grown there. It was iron-banded, scarred by time and something else, something that had clawed at it. Not human hands. I almost turned back then. Almost. But a father doesn't almost go to the edge of the world for his child. He walks into the dark without question. The key fit the lock perfectly. Of course it did. With a slow, grinding turn, the door creaked open, breathing out a smell like wet stone and dead leaves. I stepped into a corridor carved from the very bones of the hill, narrow and damp, the walls slick with moss and memory. A lantern hung just inside the doorway, flickering to life on its own as I passed, its light cold and bluish, like moonlight underwater. As I walked, the sound of the village faded, replaced by something deeper. Not silence, exactly. A hum, low and mournful, that seemed to vibrate in my ribs. I felt it before I heard it, like the distant toll of something waiting. The passage widened into a clearing of sorts, hidden behind the chapel and surrounded by ancient yew trees bent inwards, as though praying. And there it was. The bell. It stood taller than I expected, almost 2 stories high. Its frame was wrought iron, twisted into spirals that defied geometry, thorned and strange. The bell itself was blackened, mottled with age and something darker. Something that stained. No rope. Just a hammer, massive, rusted, resting at its base like a weapon. I stepped toward it, heart pounding, each footfall sounding too loud, too real. And then I saw them. Names. Hundreds, maybe thousands, carved into the stones around the bell's base. Weather-worn, faded. But one caught my eye. My breath hitched. Eleanor Thorne. That was my grandmother's name. She died long before I was born. My father never spoke of her, only once mentioning that she had disappeared. The silence had always lingered like smoke after a fire. Another name below it. Smaller. Almost hidden. Thomas Thorne. My father. My knees weakened. I reached out and touched the etching. It was cold, too cold. And the moment my fingers brushed the name, I heard the faintest echo above me. A single note. Like breath caught in iron. The bell hadn't moved. But it had spoken. I stumbled back, heart in my throat. I hadn't rung it. Not yet. And still, something stirred. The trees swayed without wind. The hum deepened, becoming something almost like words, swallowed by distance. I checked my watch. 11:57. 3 minutes to midnight. The bell was already listening. And I, fool that I was, still intended to speak. The seconds leading to midnight hung thick as smoke. I stood before the bell, breath visible in the air, though it wasn't cold, not truly. The warmth of life had simply receded, as though the world itself was holding its breath. I glanced again at the watch. The little hand shivered on the cusp of midnight. Then it happened. No chime. No thunder. No fanfare. Just a shift in the air, like the hour clicked into place, and time itself had turned to face me. Midnight. I picked up the hammer. It was heavier than it looked, its grip wrapped in a leather that flaked like dried leaves. My hands, already trembling, barely held its weight. The surface of the bell loomed above, mottled with pitted scars and lines like veins in ancient stone. I swung. The strike echoed like the world cracking in half. It wasn't just a sound, it was a pressure. The toll radiated out in waves, flattening the grass, silencing the trees, rushing down into the earth and up into the stars. My ears rang. My vision blurred. For a moment, I couldn't stand. And then it stopped. I fell to my knees, the hammer dropping beside me with a dull thud. The silence that followed was worse than the sound. It wasn't emptiness, it was anticipation. Like something was holding still, waiting for permission. And then I heard it. Footsteps. Soft, deliberate, walking across the leaf-littered ground. But I saw no one. My mouth was dry, heart pounding against my ribs. The trees had drawn tighter around the clearing, bending their limbs inward, casting twisting shadows in the pale lantern light. The steps drew nearer. I could hear the breathing now, ragged, wet, shallow. Then I saw her. Ellie. Standing at the edge of the clearing. My breath caught in my throat. She looked just as I remembered, red scarf, damp hair clinging to her face, eyes wide with that curious light she always had. But something was wrong. She was too still. The wind didn't touch her. And her feet, they hovered half an inch above the earth. "Daddy," she said, her voice thin as spider silk. Every instinct screamed run, but I didn't. I stepped forward, arms half raised, disbelief washing over me. "Ellie, is it really? Do not speak to what comes." The old woman's warning struck me like cold water. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. Ellie's head tilted slightly. Her eyes blinked, slow and unnatural. "I heard you ring it," she whispered. "I came. You wanted me to come back." Her lips smiled, but her eyes didn't. Behind her, the fog thickened, and shapes moved, slow, shuffling, silent. Too many legs. Not enough faces. They circled just beyond the lantern's glow. She stepped closer. The air grew colder. "You can talk to me, Daddy," she said. "Don't you want to?" My throat tightened. Because the voice wasn't quite hers anymore. She stood only a few feet from me now, close enough that I could see the droplets of river water trailing from her fingers, soaking into the ground that didn't seem to notice. Her eyes, those once bright marbles of childhood wonder, now stared with a stillness that no living thing possesses. Not blinking. Not breathing. "Say something," she whispered. Her voice was all wrong now, too many notes layered into one, like a choir out of tune. It slithered into my ears, tugging on old, sweet memories and twisting them like wire. I shook my head. She tilted hers again, a slow mechanical motion. "Why won't you talk to me, Daddy? Don't you love me anymore?" My throat closed. That was her phrase. She used to say it whenever I was stern with her, her little arms crossed in exaggerated defiance. But now it came out flat, recited, like a line read too many times. Behind her, the shadows crept closer. I could see them more clearly now, figures that mimicked people but lacked details, like half-formed statues melting in the fog. One had its arms where its face should have been. Another bent backwards at the waist, dragging its hands across the soil with long, hooked fingers. Ellie didn't look back at them. She didn't need to. They were hers. Or she was theirs. "You brought me back," she said. "That means I belong to you." The words were wrong. A child should never say that. Not like that. There was no warmth in them. Only claim. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the hammer I had dropped. She didn't follow. She only raised one hand and beckoned. "I came for you, too," she said. "You don't have to be alone anymore. Just say it. Just speak to me." And then, just for a second, the mask slipped. Her face flickered, not visibly, but viscerally, like a ripple beneath the skin. Her eyes turned a shade too dark. Her mouth stretched too wide. And beneath it, something else moved, something pale and open and endless. I clamped my teeth shut so hard my jaw ached. Because I realized then, this thing didn't want to be remembered. It wanted to be invited. The toll was permission. Words would be the welcome. I turned to run, but the bell behind me groaned, a long, low moan of iron, as though sensing my retreat and disapproving. The air itself pressed in, sticky and wet, pulling at my limbs. I looked back once more. She was still there, smiling too wide, her feet still floating just above the earth. "Don't leave me again," she said. And her voice cracked like glass. I ran. Not out of courage. Out of instinct. Out of some final, flickering fragment of survival that hadn't yet been eaten by grief. The fog parted before me as I moved, but not willingly. It dragged against my skin like cobwebs soaked in breath. It knew I was trying to leave. Behind me, I heard her voice again, Ellie's voice, but it was unraveling. "Daddy, come back, please, please, don't go, don't leave me again." Each word was stitched to the next, less human than the last. And then another voice joined hers, deeper, heavier, like stone grinding on bone. He rang the bell, he rang it, he opened the door. My foot struck a root, and I fell hard against the damp earth, hands sinking into the cold moss. I tasted blood. But I didn't stop. I scrambled forward, breathing ragged, the trees now closing in like ribs made of rot. Shapes moved in the periphery, tall, gliding forms with faces that flickered in and out like forgotten names. One leaned close as I passed, whispering in a voice that sounded like my own father. "She forgave me, why won't you forgive yourself?" I screamed, a hoarse bark of raw panic, and stumbled forward toward the chapel's glow. The doorway was still open, thank God, still open. As I reached it, something tugged at my ankle. I kicked wildly, twisting to look. It was a hand. Small. Childlike. But the fingers were too long. Too jointed. The nails like wet bark. I saw her face behind it, Ellie, smiling that same broken smile, eyes empty of reflection. And something else, something taller, pale and faceless, loomed behind her like a shadow that had never belonged to a human shape. "Just one word," she whispered. "Say my name. And I'll stay." The hand gripped tighter. My heart pounded in my skull. My throat clenched shut. Then I remembered the key. The old woman had given me the key to this door. Not the bell. The door. With a desperate lunge, I reached into my pocket, gripped the iron key, and jammed it into the lock from the inside. As it turned, the fog screamed. That's the only way I can describe it, not the wind, not the trees. The fog itself screamed, a high, keening wail like grief made audible, like thousands of mouths gasping all at once. The hand let go. I slammed the door behind me. Darkness swallowed the chapel. Total. Cold. But I was alone again. And for the first time since I had seen her face in the clearing, I wept. Because it wasn't her. And yet, somewhere in that thing, something had remembered her. Enough to make me believe. I don't know how long I sat there, slumped against the chapel wall, fists clenched so tight my nails drew blood. The lanterns had gone out. The pews were swallowed by shadow, the altar a black silhouette against the stone. Only my breathing reminded me I hadn't vanished with the fog. I couldn't hear her voice anymore. But the silence was worse. Because it wasn't empty. It watched. Eventually, I stood, legs trembling beneath me like saplings in a storm. I staggered toward the front of the chapel, toward the door that would take me back to the village, back to my car, if it was even still there. But I didn't make it far. Because the chapel had changed. Where once there had been a single aisle leading straight to the heavy doors, there were now two. One veered left, one right, and the door itself, gone. Just a wall of smooth, untouched stone. The chapel had shifted. I froze, blood thudding in my ears. Behind me, the door I'd locked, the one I'd fled through, remained exactly as I left it. The key still in the lock, cold and humming. I turned back to the twin aisles. Left or right? Choose. I chose right. I don't know why. Maybe because the left path felt colder. Or maybe I heard something, movement, a breath, curling from that side. Whatever the reason, I moved. Slowly. Like prey. The pews here were unfamiliar. Twisted, elongated. Some fused into the stone itself, like the wood had tried to grow into the chapel, or out of it. I passed by a broken stained glass window, its shards scattered like teeth. The image it had once shown, a woman in black, ringing a bell, was shattered. But her face looked like my wife. That nearly stopped my heart. I stumbled past it, deeper into the warped corridor. A sound drifted in behind me, the creak of wood bending. Footsteps, not echoing, but muffled, as though they were walking not on stone, but on something softer. I didn't turn around. Ahead, I saw light. A small room had opened at the end of the corridor, dimly lit by candles that hadn't been there before. And in the center, an old wooden table. Upon it, a photograph. It was me, holding Ellie in my arms. Her face pressed into my chest, grinning that impossible grin that made strangers smile. But I'd never seen this picture before. Someone had taken it from behind. My hands began to shake. There was something else beneath the photo. A page. Handwritten. I picked it up with trembling fingers. The bell does not summon the dead, it read. It awakens what wears their faces. A sound behind me, a breath, sudden and close. I turned, slowly. And there in the shadows, inches from me, a hand reached out. Pale. Small. Familiar. But wrong. So very wrong. The hand hovered just inches from my chest, fingers splayed like it was reaching not to grasp, but to remember. Skin so pale it was nearly translucent, veins like frost across a windowpane. I couldn't move. My whole body locked in place, as if my grief had rooted me to the stone. Then the hand dropped. Vanished. Like it had been deciding. Weighing. Tasting. I stumbled back, nearly knocking over the table. The photo fluttered to the floor. When it landed, the image had changed. Now I stood alone, arms outstretched to nothing. Ellie was gone from it. I ran. Out of the candlelit room, back into the warped corridor, back toward the chapel's core, but the way had changed again. The passage twisted, no longer leading back to the twin aisles, but curving down, beneath the stone. The chapel was folding itself like paper, guiding me inward. Or perhaps deeper. I followed. What else was there to do? The stairs descended in slow, uneven spirals, each step marked with carvings worn nearly flat. I recognized none of them, symbols, maybe, or letters in a language that hadn't been spoken in 1,000 years. The air thickened. Damp, iron-scented. And then I saw it. A door, massive, circular, formed not of wood or stone but bone. Hundreds of bones, human, I think, shaped into an arch, held together with sinew that pulsed faintly, as if breathing. In the center, carved into the keystone, was the bell's symbol. The same thorns, the same spirals. The sigil of the toll. My hand, without my consent, reached forward. Touched it. The door shuddered. Then opened. Beyond it, silence. And then, not silence. A whisper. So many whispers, all speaking at once, all saying the same name. Ellie. 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 My daughter's name, repeated by hundreds of voices, none of them hers. The chamber was vast, circular, its ceiling lost in darkness. And in the center stood a pedestal. Upon it, an object that should not have existed. A bell. Smaller than the one outside. Cast in black stone. Veined with gold. And moving, not swaying, not swinging, but breathing, as though it were alive. I approached. And when I did, the whispers stopped. The silence that followed was listening. On the pedestal, next to the breathing bell, sat another object. Ellie's red scarf. Still damp. Still warm. I reached for it. And the bell inhaled. A long, rattling breath, like a tomb opening. I froze. Because as I touched the scarf, I remembered something. My father had warned me, all those years ago. Not just about the bell. He had told me why he left his home. Why he never went back. He had heard it. Once. Long ago. He had rung the bell. And whatever answered had followed him into waking life, not in form, but in grief. Now I had rung it too. And the thing it had given me, a voice, a face, a lie, wanted out. And I had just picked up its tether. The scarf in my hands pulsed with warmth, not like cloth left in the sun, but like flesh. Like something that had just now let it go. The dampness clung to my skin, cold at first, then slowly warming, like it was sinking to me. I couldn't move. The small bell on the pedestal, the one that breathed, let out a single sound. Not a ring. Not a chime. A gasp. It echoed through the chamber, bouncing from wall to wall like something desperate to be remembered. The moment it sounded, the walls around me shifted. What once looked like old stone began to move. I realized they weren't walls at all. They were faces. Hundreds. Maybe thousands. Pressed into the stone, mouths agape, eyes hollow, locked in an eternal scream. They hadn't been carved, they'd been fused. Drawn into the chapel's roots like ivy. Their agony wasn't over. It was preserved. The whispers returned. Only now they were inside me. She was yours. You called her. You opened the door. I dropped the scarf. It hit the ground with a sound like flesh striking stone. Too heavy. Too real. Behind me, something stepped forward. I didn't hear it so much as feel it. A ripple through the air, like a new gravity being born. I turned, slowly. It wore Ellie's face. But now the seam showed. The eyes too wide, too clear, too hungry. Her mouth curved up in a smile far too large for her face. Her hands were twitching, folding in and out of themselves like paper cranes in wind. Something beneath her skin shifted, too many joints, not enough structure. She tilted her head. You brought me home, she said. That voice, if you listened closely, it wasn't just Ellie's. There were other voices hidden beneath it. An old man. A child crying. A woman whispering. All braided into one. She stepped closer. Don't cry, she said. You don't have to be sad anymore. I'm here now. I'm always here. She reached out. And I realized then what the bell truly did. It didn't summon the dead. It replaced them. It took the shape of grief, wore it like skin, and waited for permission. A word. A name. An invitation. I backed away. She followed, slowly, matching my steps in reverse. The whispers rose again, louder now. Say her name. Speak her back. Let her stay. My mouth moved. Not by choice. I could feel my jaw unlocking, my lips twitching toward the syllables of her name. But I bit down. Hard. I tasted blood. I forced my eyes shut. And I spoke a different name. Thomas Thorne. My father's name. The air fractured. The thing wearing Ellie's face staggered back, shrieking not in pain, but in confusion. The voice broke apart, fragmenting into dozens of screaming echoes. The small bell cracked. And the walls, the faces, began to wail. Because I hadn't said the name it wanted. I had turned the bell's gaze onto itself. Onto my bloodline. The toll hadn't ended. And I, like my father before me, had become part of the chain. The chapel began to collapse inward, not with dust and ruin, but with memory. The very structure seemed to fold in on itself, collapsing like a dream upon waking. I ran. One more time. Through doorways that weren't there moments before, up stairwells too steep to climb, chased by the sound of hundreds of bells tolling inside my skull. And behind it all, a single whisper, soft and sad. You could have kept her. I burst from the chapel into open air, stumbling like a newborn fawn, hands grasping at nothing. The sky above had no stars. Just fog, roiling and glowing faintly from within, as if something vast and unseen moved behind it. The village was gone. Where crooked houses had once leaned, there were now skeletal trees, each one strung with wind chimes made of teeth. They clicked and swayed gently, though no wind stirred. The gravel path I'd driven in on had sunk beneath the earth, swallowed whole. But my car was there. Pristine. Undisturbed. As if I had never left it. I ran to it like a drowning man to a half-rotted raft. The key still in the ignition. The moment I sat behind the wheel, the engine started, on the first turn. Not a sputter, not a delay. I drove. Faster than was safe. Tires kicking up dirt and fog. My eyes never left the mirror. In it, I saw her, standing at the chapel's remains. Watching. Smiling. And around her, the others gathered. Those who wore the names of our dead. The memories we'd made flesh. None of them followed. They didn't need to. Because they had left something behind. I crossed a ridge, and just like that, the fog broke. Sunlight spilled across the road. Trees swayed. Birds sang. Life had returned, indifferent and ordinary. But the moment I passed that invisible line between Widow's Hollow and the waking world, I knew something had followed me. Not her. Not the thing wearing her. But the sound. A single note, faint and distant. Like a bell struck once and never quite stopped ringing. It's with me still. Sometimes at night, when the house is quiet and the world lies sleeping, I hear it again. A low hum, barely audible, but always there. And sometimes, I see her shadow in the corner of a mirror, or hear a child's breath against the windowpane when no one is outside. My father had it too. I understand that now. He'd look into the distance during family dinners, eyes clouded. As if something far away was speaking to him in a language only grief could decipher. He never spoke of the bell after that first night. Neither will I, not again. But I've written this down for you, not to warn you. Warnings come too late. Grief isn't something that listens to reason. You'll go, if you must. You'll toll the bell. And when it answers, you'll believe it's her. Or him. Or them. And maybe, just maybe, it'll even speak your name. But know this. Once you ring the bell, you will always hear its echo. Even when no one else does. Because the dead don't come back. Only the hollow things do. And they remember what you asked for. Forever.